Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, it's just two moms who happen to be therapists getting together, asking ourselves, what is the village? Where can we get it, and how do we cultivate it? We have Dr. Julie Franks, a clinical therapist from Washington, on the show today, and we're exploring the beliefs and feelings that come when us moms feel like we don't have that village, and the importance of paying attention to your stage of motherhood and how to create the right kind of connections you need. If you're new here, you're listening to the How We Get Thru podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations with healers all over the world. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Thru app. My mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through all the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Thru community. Hello, and welcome back to the How We Get Thru podcast. Today we have Dr. Julie Franks. She is a clinical therapist in Washington on an island. What's it called? Bainbridge Island?
Bainbridge Island. We're just right across the water from Seattle.
Yes, so fun. And Dr. Julie specializes with moms and women who are wanting to become moms. So we are so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Okay, we were talking a little bit before. I mean, we're both sick. We're both moms. And we're both still working. So here we are. Shout out to all the moms out there that are sick and still showing up. And we kind of wanted to talk about the idea of the village because it's been floating around for years. I think I've also mentioned it on like 2 podcasts ago, I think with Aurora. I'm like, where's the village? What's the village? So we're so excited to talk to you about that today. We like to start every episode with a mental health myth. And so we'd love to know yours around village.
Right. So I was thinking about this last night because there are so many myths around village that it's almost hard to choose just one. But the one I want to talk about is this myth that all the other moms have a village and we don't. Because I think that, we're both sick. And this morning when I woke up, it was like, wow, it'd be so great if I had this village to call and be like, hey, I'm going to phone a friend. I'm sick today. Want to come take over? And I don't know about you, but that's like a comical, like laughable idea that somebody would just like take over for me today.
Yeah.
There's no one else to do it. And I think that it's good to have a sense of humor about it, but we can get really down on it when we start to believe that everyone else has this village and we don't. And so there's maybe something wrong with us or something wrong with how we're parenting or mothering or showing up each day that means we don't have the village. And I think that's really hard.
Yes. I mean, added to the list of things that are shaming in motherhood, right? One of my clients is reading Daring Greatly, and she talked about shame showing up for women in their body and in motherhood. And I feel like this is the same thing as like, there's a shame around, well, you can't make friends or this isn't available to you for some reason, right?
Right. And I think, so Daring Greatly is Brene Brown's book, and I'm just like a super Brene Brown fan. So I'm really glad that you brought her up. But I think that what Brene Brown like tries to give this message that the power in unwrapping ourselves from shame is to start talking about it. And I think that's why we want to talk about this idea of the village today, because when we hold on to that belief that we're the only ones that don't have it, the shame just gets worse and worse and worse. But if we can like talk about it and learn about what other people's experiences are like compared to our own, I think we'll find that we have a lot more in common and a lot less of us have a village than we think.
And maybe can you talk about like what are some thoughts or feelings that people have or women have around not having a village? Like what are the beliefs? Like that we're not good enough, that we can't make friends, that I need to stay isolated?
I think also we can have this belief that like it's not worth even putting ourselves out there anymore. It's like I don't have it. So clearly I'm the reason that I don't have it. And so I'm just going to stop putting myself out there, and I'm just going to stay stuck in this place where I don't feel good about where I'm at with my friendship circle, with my loved ones, with the support that I need, and just keep drowning in like the load of that, right? It's like without the village, we have so much that we're in charge of. And it feels really lonely and it's too much. It's not, we weren't meant to do this by ourselves.
Which I think I've said that multiple times, and I've had other people say that on the podcast multiple times, and I think it's still so valuable to hear that because I think there's a lot of pressure for women to do everything and to be everything and to look like everything and all of those pressures and we forget that we weren't built for this. And so we keep trying to force something that like innately isn't in our biology. Like we were born to be in relationships with other people. We were born to have community. We were born to do things with people. And I mean, just like society, everything has become more introspective, working from home, like social media, everything is kind of been almost cutting us off from each other for a long time.
Yeah, we really need that connection to thrive. And I think it's not just having connection, it's having a certain kind of connection because, and I don't know that this will resonate with every mom, but I am kind of in the gray area of my career where I at one time was working way more than full time and had my son and thought that I would just kind of bounce right back into that and just found that that didn't actually work for me. So now I work a few days a week and have been slowly building up. And as a part of my work, I have lots of connections. And in my private practice, I work with other moms. And so that's really supportive of me, even though I'm the therapist, because I get to hear like how much my experience is really like other people's. But I also work in a university, and universities aren't really designed for moms. And so I have a lot of connections there that give me messages that I'm not doing enough or I should be doing something different. And there's a lack of understanding about just how hard it really is to balance career life with mom life and where priorities should lay. And so I think that it's like the village has to be more than just being connected. It has to be connected in a certain way because when we're connected with the wrong people or the wrong messages, I think we just end up feeling worse.
And unfortunately, I mean, it depends on where you work. Like if you're in corporate or again, like university, like there's a lot of structures that aren't welcoming or understanding of what it is and what it takes to be a mom and work, right? And the sacrifices. Or even if you're like going for the same promotion and someone doesn't have kids and you have kids, like, is that going to be a deal breaker for them, right? Because you won't be available. You won't be working more than 40 hours a week, right? Because there's different priorities that shift. And I think they're good for me anyway. Like it feels good to kind of reprioritize the value, not just on my kids, but for me. Like if there's less of me to give, then do I want to keep like busting out work or do I want to shift that around and so I can have more time for me? Like, am I doing okay?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of freedom once we give ourselves permission to say, I want to reprioritize. And I know, like, for me, I have started to become really intentional about where I put that energy. And it sounds like that's what you're saying is like, there's only so much that I have to give. So maybe I would have given it in this place before, but now I want that to go with my kids and my family. That's my top priority. And I've found that the more I've kind of leaned into that myself, the more I've been saying, I'm going to have to say no to this next opportunity, or I'm going to have to say no to this specific thing. And my academic work has shifted and it's getting more and more aligned with my values, but it's a process that takes time. And I think that for me too, it feels really good when I recently said that I'm going to have to step down from a board membership that is pretty important and actually centered on women's work. I just don't have the bandwidth to do it right now. And I felt really bad. But like once I said no and explained it to the other women who are all moms too with kids that are out of the house so they have more time, they were like, oh, I'm so glad you're prioritizing your family, and like gave me so much support. But I had to say that those are my priorities to hear that feedback. And it's really hard and because it feels disappointing to other people when you set those limits.
And I think, the question is like, is it disappointing to you or what is, I think for mothers, right, we shift the value maybe onto other people. And I think there's so much like beautiful power in reclaiming that. Like if I were to shift that back to me, if I were to ask myself things first, do I have the bandwidth? Does this feel aligned for me anymore? It becomes really clear that there's a yes or a no. And then it becomes difficult. Like, okay, now I'm going to let down all these people or all these beliefs, right, around that, and having to kind of sit with that and work through that. But when you come back to yourself, there's actually a lot of clarity. And I think in motherhood it's just hard and you give a lot away. So at the end of the day, sometimes it doesn't feel really clear. It doesn't feel really grounded. It feels like, where am I? Who am I? And like, what do I need? So the art of like kind of coming back to yourself or giving yourself permission to say, like, does this position fit with me anymore? And what would it look like to let that go? Does that feel good or does that feel bad?
Yeah, and I think that once you do that and you give yourself that permission and have that freedom, what naturally happens is that the circle around you starts to become a circle that's more aligned with how you feel about things, right? So for me, I gave up this board membership recently, and like, it's greatly decreased my stress level. And so I'm able to be more present. I'm able to put more time in the relationships that really do align with the values I have right now. And it's been kind of nice to realize, like, wow, I really did more before in my career than I realized. And now I'm doing more at home than I realized. And that's been like a really nice shift to kind of recognize what I'm doing too.
And your son is 2.5?
He's almost 2.5 now. Yeah.
Yeah. In it, girl.
It's a little bit of a tough age. Our preschool teacher, we talked to her on Friday because he's just starting the like hitting phase.
Yeah, welcome.
And she said, yeah, I think he's entering the 3-year-old phase a little early. And we were like, oh no, we heard that was the hardest year.
The three-nager. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the three-nager.
Yes.
So yeah, he's 2.5. It's I think a little harder for me than the newborn stage even was. I'm finding like it's more mentally tiring.
Yeah.
And so I think that him being a toddler and kind of getting towards this three-nager stage for me has been another sign like, hey, I really need to get my values and priorities in line because I'm having less and less of myself to give.
Yes, a beautiful point of like what stage you are in motherhood and adjusting to that, because just as quickly as they grow out of a stage or grow into a stage, you are also growing with them. And so like having that kind of flexibility and again, stopping and asking yourself, like, do I have more room for things, right? Like my kids are 4, just turned 4 and 5, will be 6. And I feel like the capacity has expanded, like there's still moments and it's draining in a different way. But it's not like I'm like, don't put that in your mouth. What are you doing? Like, it's all just so stressful. Don't hit. Am I a bad mom? Do kids not like you because you're hitting people? Like, stop biting. Like, it's just a different phase. And so how do you give yourself that grace and understanding that you get to grow with them and your capacity gets to grow or your values get to shift as they do that as well?
And actually, I'm glad that you kind of brought this transition idea up about motherhood and this idea that it's just constantly like evolving, right? It's like one stage, the next stage, and everyone has their own opinion about what's harder or what's easier. But I think what I wanted to talk about in terms of the village is that I think our village also tends to shift as our kids go through like new phases and stages. And I think people don't expect that. So I know like in my practice, a lot of women feel really lonely during certain phases of motherhood. And just speaking about my own experience, when my son started preschool this year was one of the lonelier times for me because he started preschool, but a lot of our friends' kids didn't. And so they kind of stayed in this circle that we had all been in together where we'd meet every morning for a play date or something. And they were still doing kind of the activities that are for kids that are not in preschool in our area. And all of a sudden, my son was in preschool. And so I wasn't included in that anymore because it didn't make sense. I mean, I didn't want to go either.
Right.
But I wasn't included because we made a transition. And with that transition came like lots of illnesses. And
Yes.
dealing with that still today, both of us. But it was this idea that like, we got in a new phase. We got in the preschool phase. We got in a new way of being as a family. And all of a sudden, our friendship circle just really shrank. And I think that we weren't prepared. I mean, it's funny because I'm a therapist. I should be like prepared. But I think when it's about yourself, you're
No.
like the last to be prepared. And it's so obvious to
Yeah.
everyone on the outside what's going to happen. And if it were one of my clients, I would have like kind of helped to prepare them that this might be a part of it. Their village might change. But for myself, I didn't even think about it. And I just remember like 3 months into preschool telling my husband, like, I feel like I'm a newborn mom again. I'm just like by myself all the time. And, because we go to preschool and we come home and it's nap time and then we wake up and we have to make dinner and we don't get to see our friends. And my husband was like, I think you need to make friends that are more in line with like what your routine is like now. And I was like, oh, well, obviously, like I thought of that myself.
Yeah.
you know, like obviously that's what I need to do. And
Yeah.
I put effort into that and things got better. But I had to change the way I was connecting to other women and connecting to my friends. And some of my friends and I stopped hanging out because we just can't get our schedules to match. And there's no
Yeah.
hard feelings. It's just the village changed.
Yeah.
Have you been through that too with your kids? Because they've kind of probably moved even maybe out of preschool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, also, I wanted to mention when you're talking to like the space for grief around that, like that, and the shock of like, wait a minute, I thought they're all the same age. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And like you move or they go to this school, you go to that school. That it is just, you know, being again open and flexible and allowing that to change, but also holding space for grief. Like, man, this sucks. Like, because the loneliness is the worst in motherhood. Like, it's like, oh man, I'm back here at that feeling. Like, what needs to kind of shift and change, or how do I have empathy for myself in that? Which is really hard. But in the same season, yeah, one of them's at kindergarten, one of them's at preschool. And kindergarten is like, it's a great school. We are walking distance. It's rated like 10 out of 10. Like, it's
Oh,
wonderful.
nice.
Yeah, very lucky. And we were automatically in because we're so close. But the like volunteer hours and how like the schedule of things, and I think kindergarten's just like there's so many parties, there's all these things. It's also overwhelming a lot of times. And then I feel split between two schools of like, well, I don't want to invest in this school because I don't know where the kids are going to go, and my son's going to go to my daughter's school next year. And so it does feel like I feel frozen a little bit of I don't know where to invest and how much to invest because I'm also tired. I feel tired. And I've made a couple friends at my daughter's school, which is good. But then I also have really good friends that are like my friends, that they have kids too, but they're not exactly the same ages, but we still get together. So it feels a little split, you know what I mean? But also like getting into sports and all the things, like everybody said, like, just wait till they get in school and then they'll want to hang out with like some people, and you pray that you get along with that other mom or that other parent, because they want to play date. So it's like it's a different layer that I'm learning to navigate, but there's definitely more options when they get into like real school, I guess, if that's what you want to call it.
Yes, there's more options, but then it also feels like the options are a little overwhelming in the
Yeah.
sense that like, which option do I want to be a part of?
Yeah.
And I think part of what I always recommend with the village, which you probably do too, is like to try different things out. Even if, like I don't get a lot of invitations to go do like volunteer and stuff because we go to a Montessori school and they really like the classroom to be the space just for the kids. And so you get invited in the classroom like once a year and that's it. And then I live in a rural area. And so there's like the restaurants close at like 8 p.m. Like, I'm not even kidding. So by the time our kids go to sleep, there's like nowhere to
Oh
meet
my
up.
gosh.
And it's fine. But if I actually do have the chance to like make plans or someone asks me to do something, even if I'm like, I don't know about that other mom, like I can tell that we maybe could be friends or maybe not. I try to just say yes and go and try it out with the expectation of like, maybe it will be a fun night and maybe we'll want to hang out again or maybe we won't. And I've done that, and I've actually found that, like, some moms I like a lot more than I thought I would, and we have a lot more in common, and other moms that I actually, like, would have loved for them to ever invite me to do something, once they do, or I invite them, it's like, "Actually, we're not gonna be friends." Like, no hard feelings, but, like, we have nothing in common, it turns out, you know? And so I'm always kind of the opinion, like, just try something out because you might make a great friend for that, like, stage that you're in. And then maybe it'll last for just the soccer season or something. But it would be nice to have that, like, village of somebody that gets what you're going through in this one part of your life for a little while.
Yeah. And even that village part of like the shared responsibility of, hey, can you pick up my kid from soccer practice and I'll pick them up the next day or whatever. Like that kind of that's the village piece that I miss, right? The shared responsibility, like, hey, I have more flexibility in my schedule today. I can pick up the kids and they can come over for a play date if you need to work or whatever. And I think a lot of times it's hard to enter into that, into the either the invitation of that or allowing someone else to do that for us because we feel like we need to operate so solo and on our own that it takes a lot to say yes, even if you get the invitation.
Yeah, or like, I know sometimes for me, I'm like, people have offered, like, after I tell my friends, like, oh, we had this crazy thing happened and like my husband had to go to the ER or whatever. And they're like, oh, you should have called me. Like, we would have taken your son. And it like never occurred to me to even ask. So sometimes I get like stuck in that, like maybe I should have asked for someone to help me. And then other times I will get the offer and then I like end up saying no because it's like they're not the person I want to be asking. Like I want the grandparents to be asking or the aunt or, there's like
Yeah.
certain people that you go into motherhood thinking, oh, they're in this role. They're going to be super involved in this way. And then maybe they are, maybe they're not, right? I think for our family, it kind of comes in waves. We have a grandparents that were super into the baby phase and we don't see as much. And we have another set of grandparents that weren't super into the baby phase and we see much more now that we have a toddler. We do have like grandparents around, but sometimes I'm like, well, like my mom knows that I'm having this. Like, how come my mom isn't offering to come help? So I'll be like, no to my friend. But if my mom would have offered, I would have said yes. Right. And so it's
Yeah.
like, why do we put these parameters on it? Like later, I'm like, why did I say that? I should have just said yes. It would have been the same outcome,
Yeah. I think, again, another layer of grief. My mom lives on an island from where I live, Catalina Island, which is you can't drive, you have to ferry. And it's great because we can just drop the kids off. She'll come over and we'll drop the kids off with her and they'll go for a weekend, which is nice. But it's like, no, this isn't convenient at all for the day to day. I just want to go over your house on Sunday because I don't want to cook, like, can you be closer? And so, yeah, my in-laws are also, they're very close and they're very involved, which is great, but we can't like burden them with everything. And so, I grew up with my grandma. So I'm like, girl, this is what we do in our family. Like, get over here.
I grew up with my grandma too. And I also grew up with quite a few friends who had grandparents that lived with them or like their parents lived with the grandparent. And I have to say that I didn't really understand that as a kid, obviously. And then as an adult, I kind of thought sometimes like, oh, that's kind of like interesting that you live with your parents, like you didn't want your own house or privacy or something. And now that I have a child, I'm like, oh, that is ingenious. I
Yes.
should not have moved out of my parents' house. I should have just insisted on moving my husband in
Yep.
because
Mm-hmm.
then I would have a lot more help and support, even if
Yep.
they weren't doing a lot of the things, just like being in a house with another person that could help, like take
Yeah.
care of the kitchen and the dogs and whatever. It would be so wonderful. And so I have to say that I'm like secretly jealous of people that have that situation
Yeah.
or very involved grandparents because my parents still work. And so they're not able to they can help with things, but I can't like call them on a sick day type of
Yeah.
thing.
Right. Yeah. Which is so hard. And like, again, that village piece that I feel like is missing. I remember turning to my husband when we had two newborns, separate times. And I said, let's not forget what this is like when our kids have kids, if they decide to, right? I'm like, I need to be asking like, hey, do you want a date night tonight? Like, hey, do you want me to take the kid? Hey, like blah, blah, blah. Because I think part of being in motherhood is like, you don't really know what you need sometimes too, until someone you don't feel burdened from offers to take the kid. And I think that's probably what happens when friends ask. It's like, oh, is this a burden for you now? Like my sister-in-law will take the kids a lot. But she's like, no, it's not a burden. Like they play together. It's like easier for me. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. And I'm not that person. I'm not like, let me come over with your kids. I'm having a little bit more capacity, but I can show up for her in a different way, you know? But it is that kind of like that piece of, it's easier with parents because it's like, this is what you do, you know, and this is good for you too. Where it's a friend, it feels like, is there something I owe you now? Or the exchange might not feel as even. At least that's what I feel.
And I think that's actually, I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things I wanted to say about having a village is that being in a village is not just about getting support, it's about giving support back, right? So it's like there's this altruism that we're looking for. Like we want the village a lot of times because we don't want to be lonely. That's part of it. But we also need like actual concrete help with things. We need help with making decisions. We need help with childcare. We need help with deciding what for dinner. And maybe like also just sympathy and empathy for all the BS that we go through as moms, right? But part of that is like we have to have the capacity to give that back. And it doesn't have to be even Stevens, because I think that's like just so impossible. I think people try to do that. Like on Tuesday, I'll take your kids, and on Thursday, you take my kids. But it's like the experience of watching the kids is in no way ever equal, right? Like I think that it could go really well or really badly. Who knows?
Yes.
But I think it's like sometimes I will think like I can't accept that help that someone's offering because I would never return it. I don't have the ability. Like I don't even have the ability to respond to all of my text messages. So how am I going to supervise your child that's never been away from you one day, right? Like that's going to be way too hard. So to me, sometimes I'm like, it's easier to just say no and to feel stuck with the stress I'm in, because the idea of giving back and reciprocating is like way out of my capacity. And I think that a lot of people probably feel that way, right? Like maybe not breaking it down, but realizing like, I don't have the capacity to like try to find friends. I don't have the capacity to try to reach out. Like, you know, just asking is so hard. Receiving is hard. And that makes finding a village really complicated.
And I think you're pointing to like the guilt and the shame of like, well, I don't even have capacity to do this. Like and they have all this capacity, or like the comparison or the shoulds, like the shoulds of motherhood. I should do this. I should ask for help. I should say yes. I should have capacity, whatever it is. You know, I think it's just this invitation of like, if you have people around you, what is preventing you from making those connections or saying yes? Just a good question. Ask yourself, because we don't want to operate alone. We don't want to operate separately. So why are we?
Yeah. And I want also moms that are not working outside the home that are listening to hear, like, if you don't feel like you have the capacity as well, even if you're not working outside of the home, I want moms to hear that's okay. Because one of the things that I hear a lot from the moms I work with who are not working outside of the home, who have stopped their career or who never had a career because they went right into motherhood, is like even more guilt that like they aren't juggling more things, quote unquote, more things.
Yeah.
And so they should have more capacity. And I think that even if you're not working outside of the home, you are juggling a lot of things. And you very well might be juggling more than a mom who is working outside of the home, because everyone's mom and that everyone's situation working outside of the home is different, and people have different levels of support. So like I have friends that work outside of the home. They work over in Seattle, so they commute. So they have really long work days. Like they're gone 14 hours and they don't get to see their kids every day because of that. But they also are not in charge of dinner. They're not in charge of bath time. They don't clean the house. They don't do lots of things that as someone in the gray area, I'm kind of doing both. And then moms who are home and their partner is commuting those hours or gone most of the time, they're doing all of it. And what I hear from so many stay-at-home moms is like, all I'm doing is this. I should be able to have the capacity to do more. And I just want everyone to hear that message. Like, that is actually a really hard thing to be doing.
Full-time mom. Full-time mom.
That's like from like what I recall from like my mom brain is that's like a 90+ hour a week job, which is probably more than your partner is working outside of the home.
Right.
And so I think we kind of put these standards on ourselves, like I'm only doing this or I'm only doing that. I should have this capacity. What's wrong with me for not having it?
Yeah. And the comparison around that again, right? We start looking around and being like, well, what are other women doing? And are they got it? Like, we'll see the highlight reel of Instagram and like, oh, they're finding time for themselves and they're doing this and they're working outside the home or whatever it is, right? But we're all sacrificing something in some way, or we're all having a season where we can't place value on this or whatever, or it's not good or bad. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And how do we celebrate those differences within each other and within ourselves, right? Like this, what is making me feel bad about that? What am I trying to force myself into that actually isn't aligned with my current reality or what I've chosen? My husband and I both chose to when our kids were young, and still we're kind of like transitioning out of that, of working for ourselves and having them home as much as possible, or working with them, or having, when they're younger, we can be around more. We also live in California where it's very expensive to put them in childcare, but I'm sure yours is the same.
Yeah, ours is the same.
Yep.
It definitely impacts the decision because you have to have such a high income to make it that you're even breaking even with childcare.
Exactly. And so that was part of our choice, is like we weren't probably the most financially well off, but we had the time with our kids, and that was our choice at that time. And now we're moving out of that because they're in school now. So again, it's like we can compare ourselves. Well, man, we really should have made more money back then or did this. But I was like, no, we chose this lifestyle because we wanted that for our kids and for our family. So let's not harp on ourselves for that. And do we want something different now? Is our family changing again? And what does that look like for us?
Yeah, and I think we have to have that compassion for ourselves. And the reason I think that is because every family, like you said, you made a decision. This is what we want to do. And you found a way that you can meet your family's financial needs that you had, right? Because there's some level of this is how much money we have to pay the mortgage or whatever. And to be able to have this value of being home. And I think that for me, that's been something that I think just because my career was so important to me before I had a child, and because I really expected to just bounce back into it, it's been kind of this slow process for me to really make sure that the way I'm working is aligning with my values. And I've had to have so much compassion for myself because I think I've gotten so much resistance from other people on the outside. And some of that I think has been just surprise that I'm changing. I think surprise that my plans aren't working out. Not that I ever had discussed it with them, but I guess what they anticipated my plans would be. But I think that one of the things I have found is that when my values have an impact on other people that are in our village, sometimes there's a lot of another person that's also a part of our family or our friend group was able to do it. Why aren't you? Right? So how come you decided to do that and now it's impacting me differently? I kind of gotten a lot of resistance. And I think we also get really unhealthy messages about balancing mom life from people sometimes that are in our village. And so I think that I've had to really work on my own self-compassion because I don't want to embody those stereotypes or those messages, right? Sometimes I'll get something well, this other person did it. How come you're not doing it? And it's well, that was how they balanced their mom life and their family life. and I am a different person. Like, I have different limitations. I have different values. I have different financial options or whatever it is that, like, I can't afford that, or I don't have the capacity to do that. And I think like sometimes when we say things like that and we're really trying to make our values align with us, like people on the outside are like, why are you doing that? That negatively impacts me. And so I think that makes it even harder for us to stand strong and like, this is exactly what's best for our family. And so my husband and I this year in particular have really been practicing since the holidays. That's kind of when this conversation started for us, because there were a lot of expectations around our travel for the holidays, and we couldn't financially or emotionally
Yeah.
or with
All
our
the
work
above.
life balance those expectations. And we had to say no to something for the first time that we've ever had to say no. And it didn't really get received well. And it was really hard for our family. And because we don't want to disappoint people, but we were also like, we're at our complete maximum here and we don't have the money to do it. And we got a lot of resistance. And I think that since then, our conversations as like a husband and wife have been around what is best for our family.
Yeah.
And then like, what's best for me, what's best for you as individual parents. And so we've had to like really reframe. And I think that as we've done that, it's made it a lot easier to have compassion for us. Like, okay, like if we break down the decision making into like what's best for our family versus what's maybe best for all the other different parties involved, sometimes it becomes really clear like our values are just not matching up here, or our capacity isn't matching up here. And it actually has left a lot of room for like creative problem solving too. But I think that like sometimes it can be so hard to lean into our own values. And when we're not clear about our own values, then it makes it hard for other people to like embrace and accept them, And sometimes we have to find a different village that's able to embrace where we're at, right? Like, I think sometimes the village that we have is good for a moment, but not good for that next transition.
And I think there's, again, like something I don't want to forget, or sometimes we think like, I don't know, we'll say whatever, or we'll criticize someone else in motherhood, or they can't do this because they don't want to, not because they don't have capacity, whatever the belief is there. But really, when you can have compassion for yourself, you can have compassion for other people and say like, oh, I understand, or I remember what it's like. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like you are allowed to say like, this is too much, or I'm really burnt out, or, I think it's harder with family than friends, but that's a whole other story. There's an expectation, and it is hard to set those boundaries and those limits, but you have to put yourself and your family first, because it's you at the end of the day. Like, you're going to have to put them to bed that night. Are they going to be like a monster? Are they going to go to sleep? Are they cranky? Are you cranky? Like, all of that has to be kind of assessed.
I think so. And I think it's just that, at least what I've noticed is like, I have to really get clear about what's okay for me. And then sometimes I just have to be okay to accept that like it's not maybe going to be understood. Like, I don't always maybe need to be like explaining every single one of my feelings. Like, I made this choice really thoughtfully, and then I want you to like honor how thoughtful I was. But now I'm kind of like, maybe it's better if I just don't say a lot. And then I know in my heart that like my husband and I made a very thoughtful choice and did the best we could.
Yeah.
But like, sometimes when you explain it, then it makes it like worse, because then people are like arguing with your explanation. And at the same time, it can remove some of those expectations or assumptions about how you made your choice. But I've even found it with friends. I used to be able to travel for like girls' weekends and like meet up at random places. And since I've had my son, I just like can't do it. And so I'm not like out of that circle of friends. We're still in it. But I can't really participate the same way.
Yeah.
And it's like a circle of friends that don't have children. And so it's just a very different lifestyle now that we're in. And we're still friends, but like it's been sometimes hard to say like, I can't do a girls' trip this year, right? And for other people to be like, why? You don't care about like meeting up anymore? I'm like, well, I do. I just like, I can't drop the money on it that I used to, right? Like,
Yeah.
or I can't like be away from my son for 2 nights. I'm still nursing him at night. Like, I don't
Right.
want to pump. And they're like, well, people do it all the time, you know?
And I think there's part of this that I think your friends are saying like, "Hey, I miss you. I want to spend time with you." And also, I think what you're saying is, "So do I, but I don't know if I could do it in the same way anymore, or right now." And how to kind of have that conversation and honor that for both of you in the clear communication of like, "I would love to see you, but I just don't my life doesn't look like that anymore or right now."
And I think so it's like for me in some ways, like my village got smaller, like I couldn't do some of these things. But then in other ways it got bigger because now I have all these other women and other families. Like most of my friends are women, so I keep saying women. I don't spend a lot of time with men, to be honest with you, just my husband really. Like kind of for me, what I've also found is I need to focus on just a few close people at a time. Like I don't have the capacity anymore to be like, well, I've got like these 5 friends that I see on Monday and like we do our book club. And then like I've got these 5 friends that we like to go out for margaritas. And I've got like these
Yeah.
other friends that like to do like walking and exercise and hiking. Now I'm kind of like, there's probably like 3 or 4 people I have time to text back and make
Yeah.
plans with. So my circle is like in some ways really small now. And in other ways, it's like really expanded because I'm not really out of the other circles. I'm just kind of taking a break.
And even I'm thinking like work friends, it's like we're both solo entrepreneurs or therapists. It's like I don't have work friends, you know what I mean? Like or friends in the same capacity that you would I don't know, go hang out with. Like I haven't had
Like a
work
lunch date.
friends.
Like, let's take a lunch
Yes.
break together.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that just doesn't exist, I think, for a lot of people, again, as they're working from home and doing certain things, but or doing their own business. So again, it's like the effort to say like, hey, do I value community? Do I value a village? Do I need that in my life? Like kind of take inventory. And then how do I put effort towards making new friends, making mom friends, which is kind of hard and difficult, but also everybody's needing it. Sometimes we think like, oh, I can't make friends with her because she probably has like a ton of friends. And the answer is no, that mom has none, like maybe one or two, but there's not a ton of friends hanging out.
It's really surprising to me because in the past couple of years since my son was born, and I was pregnant with him during COVID. So like all of the pregnancy classes were on like
Yeah.
online, but like you didn't get to talk to the other pregnant women and it was very isolating. And so once I was able to start like making friends once he was like a few months old, I've really developed like a whole new friend group there. And some of my friends, I kind of have thought like, oh, you have tons of friends that you're already friends with. Like, do you have time to hang out with me? And then once we start hanging out, I find out that like they've been maybe even lonelier than I have. Like it's so funny like what it looks like on the outside because like, like there's like a library story time and like these different events and it seems like they're like super popular at those events and like everyone knows them. But it turns out the connections are just there in that room. And so like in
Yeah.
your mind you might be imagining like, oh, they probably like go hang out after the class and they probably like have wine in the evenings. But it turns out that they're leaving the class just as lonely as you are. And it can just be shocking to see like the reality of what people's friendships actually look like compared to what you imagine.
Yeah, I think going back to your point about the quality of the connection, right? Like, what connections are you actually craving? Are you craving just like a library date, or are you craving someone to like cry about because your toddler was up all night and sick and, you're not sleeping? Like, what kind of quality or connection are you looking for? And I think you can find that in different people. I think there can be just the library mom and there can be the friend that you're like, I am so freaking tired. I'm going to lose my mind and I have to, do all these things or whatever still today.
Yeah. And I think also thinking about like these can be people that are you're meeting with in person, but they can also be people that are far away. One of my like closer mom friends actually lives in Texas and I'm in Washington, so we're not close by. And we actually didn't even know each other, except that she came to my wedding, but I like briefly recall that because you meet a lot of people. And it's actually like my husband's work friend's wife that had a baby 2 months after me. So my husband, had said, hey, you should like text her because they like moved to Texas while she was pregnant and she didn't know a lot of people there. And we started just like texting about like Instagram accounts that we were following for breastfeeding at the time. And we became friends and like ended up meeting in person this summer with our kids and like having a vacation. But it's like for the whole year, we were like everyday supports for each other.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like developed slowly over time. But now we don't text every day because she's gone back to work and I'm working more. But we're still really bonded and really there to support each other. And so this idea that like the village has to be in your backyard, for me, that would be really hard because I live on an island and there's like limited options. And
Right.
so having like a village that's a little more expansive and even sometimes just a texting relationship for the most part can actually be really helpful. It's not going to help me with the sick days or the pickup
Right.
lines. It'll help me with the emotional support.
Yeah, yeah. And so again, I think it's an invitation to take inventory of where are you needing support in your life right now? Is it sick days? Is it emotional? Is it just friendship? Like wanting to talk about anything besides the kids, right? Is it a book club, a smutty book club, which you guys should read? Smut. It's, oh my gosh, fantasy smut
I
is like
read it.
my, have you read it? Have you read
No,
Akatar?
I'm at
Of course.
like the phase of like I can still only get 3 pages read and then I fall asleep.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was never a reader until I found something I like to read. And I'm like, this is amazing. But again, it's like there can be these pockets of people or these friends that you go to for different things as your village gets to kind of expand and grow with you. But I think that it's the invitation to keep finding those people or keep cultivating those friendships and those relationships because they can be really giving, and you can also be giving to someone else, like that cyclical energy, right? Of I give, you give, I receive, you receive, in whatever capacity we have that's unique to us.
And then just being gentle with ourselves that it's not going to be even Stevens. So
Yeah.
maybe there's going to be a couple weeks where like you get really sick and your friends bring you some dinners or like take the kids outside in the backyard for a little bit so you can take a nap.
Yes.
And maybe you don't reciprocate those things right away, but 6 months later, your friend has a rough time and you're over there helping out, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's just also like giving ourselves permission to not be fair all the time with the village, but to try our best.
Just be present. Like that could be enough, you know? Julie, you are amazing. I'm so excited for you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing for moms and with moms. We need you. We appreciate you. We are you. Tell everybody like where to find you. You do therapy in Washington, right?
Yep. So if you're a mom in Washington State and you're looking for therapy, you can find me on my website. It's nurturingthesisterhood.com. But what you can also find there, if you're outside of Washington, is supportive resources for moms. So I've got a blog, I've got different workshops and webinars. Where I would choose to get started is actually just downloading my freebie. It's all about how you can ask for help as a mom. And I think that it doesn't ask you to find a village either, because I think that's like step 2, right? Like first is figuring out what kind of help and support do you need? And then next step is figuring out where are you going to get it. But the freebie actually walks you through figuring out what types of help and support you're looking for. And then there's a worksheet to help you figure out where you want to put your energy, where you want to invest your time into meeting your own needs, and where you need to start looking outside and elsewhere. And there's some ideas for how to find that support. So that's where I would get started.
That's on your website?
It's on my website. So it's nurturingthesisterhood.com. Or if you go on Instagram and you look at Nurturing the Sisterhood, you'll find it there.
Perfect. And we'll put that in the show notes as well, so you guys can find out there.
Oh, perfect. That would be super helpful because it's a little bit of a long title.
I know, but it's so sweet. Like when you said, I was like, oh, I love that. It's worth it.
I love this idea of nurturing. And I feel like that's what women need more than anything is we need to be nurtured ourselves. And so my hope is to be a part of providing.
Thank you so much for being on the show. We'll have all that in the show notes. If you're in Washington, please check out Julie. She's amazing. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you felt represented in this episode. Motherhood is hard. We're all just trying to get through. Go ahead and check out Dr. Julie's freebie From Overwhelmed to In Control on her website or in the show notes if you need a place to start. And lastly, if you are loving what you're hearing, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts so that we can continue to reach and help other people.